Hey everybody, it's me, Tom, and time for another episode of what I think the Bible means. And this episode, I want to be talking about who I think God is, because that seems to be a pretty important question. Important to understanding, just about everything. So, who's God? I made the title of this video a little bit ironic because a guy named Jordan Peterson, a man I respect and I've learned a lot from, said, who dares to claim they know God? Or something like that. Who dares say they claim to know who God is? And there's really only one answer to that question that I can come up with. If anybody's going to do it, right? I have to. I have to dare say who God is if I'm going to try and figure out who God is, right? So I thought about it a lot, and I'm going to tell you what I found. So, God doesn't give us a lot of information about himself, like as a self-descriptive thing. A lot of it we have to interpret by action and by pattern and a lot of other things. So, one of the clues that we have about what people are is we were made in God's image. And it says that in Genesis 3 times in a row, and it says it with 3 different phrasings to cover a vastly wide variety of possible interpretations. All of them are intended. That he made man in his image, not only with the ability to choose and decide, the power to create, the ability to decide what's good and what's evil. And he made us balanced, male and female. He made us. He made us with ourselves and against ourselves. So that tells me that God, whatever God is a balanced thing that understands everything it means to be masculine and everything it means to be feminine. That's a thing that is true about God. He tells us. That's how I say it's true. He says, made in his image. In his image, he made them. That's our ability to decide. That's what that's talking about. That's unique to God. And now we have it. So are we going to make the right decisions that will elevate us? Or are we going to make bad decisions that destroy us? And then the third one, the most simple one, in his image, he made us. That one's like a totem, like an action figure. Action figures are made in man's image, right? Like we take ourselves and we make a tiny play version of ourselves. Like we're like little action figures for God, is what I think. And I think you have to realize that you don't find God unless you have the full set. And you don't get the full set till you recognize that each and every person carries a piece of that. And nobody has every piece. But all of us together might have enough of the pieces that we can figure out the pieces we don't have, like how if your puzzle's missing a big piece in the middle, but it's only one piece, you know exactly what that piece looks like. And if you have the box, you know exactly what the picture on it is supposed to look like too. You could just zoom in. And if you really cared about that puzzle enough, you could take some cardboard and cut it to that shape because you have it. And you could get just a little bit of paint or like a little spray on, and you could rebuild that piece to be almost identical to the one that is there or should be there. And a beautiful thing happens when you do that. You find the piece that you were looking for. It's not missing anymore. So you don't have to go by the painting that you did, even though it's really good. It's not the original. And then you find the original. So you find the best versions of a thing by figuring everything out around them and then trying to recreate what is in the middle. That is how you create something, nothing. That's the power of God in creation. Human beings created a lot of things, and we create every day, don't we? We create new ways to create. Think about that. We evolve the process of creation itself. The things we can make, things we can do. Who could say 2,000 years ago that to those people we were not God? We would have had the power of complete annihilation. We could bring upon them plagues, actual plagues, wipe them out. We could ruin their land at no risk to ourselves. We could demand anything of them so long as we decide not to wipe them off the face of the earth. That's one small interpretation of a part of what I think it means to be God. Is to have that ability to imagine a new way to be better that didn't exist before you. I think that's a part of God. And when I talk about the most basic version of being made in God's image, like when I talk about the action figures, that's kind of one way of looking at it, but I think a better way to describe it would be like a fancy Chinese vase, with all the painting on the side. And God takes that vase, and inside that vase, he puts everything he understands about himself. He puts a perfect knowledge of himself in that vase. And every piece of that vase, every atom, is unique. And it's woven together. And none of it is the vase without all of it in place. So that would make us the dust, right? So that's, we're like little pieces, and we don't have the whole picture. We're not born with it. We don't, know what's right. We have to decide what's right, and if we're lucky, the people who were trying to teach us a little bit about that did a halfway decent job. And if they didn't, that makes the job twice as hard. But it doesn't change where you get if you don't do the job, right? It just makes it harder to get there, maybe unfairly so. It's fair enough to say that things aren't fair, because sometimes they aren't. But it would be worse if they were fair. Like, we could die so much easier. Like, what if it really was? What if you had to be perfect all the time, down to where you put your steps? Like, John stepped off the path by 4 inches today. He got hit by a meteor. Well, that's a lesson to all of us. Don't lose your concentration when you're taking your steps. Like, we could get so much worse consequences than we do. I think the universe is pretty forgiving with the laws of cause and effect. Sometimes stuff does just come out in the wash, or it's overshadowed by the bigger truth, and it doesn't matter anymore. So you only get the vase if the little pieces of dust agree that they want to know what the vase looks like. So everybody's got to want to play. And not everybody has to play. You just need enough people to start filling in pieces with imagination, because you know everything that's around it. So it doesn't take a lot of people, really, to want the same thing, to be able to grow their versions of themselves. We can be the best things about every person we know. We just have to learn how they do it. And to learn how they do it is you just ask them. It really is that simple. Like, hey, how do you always do that? You're always so positive. What's the deal? How come you never get down? I get down all the time. That's the first part, is the courage to ask that. And nobody who has the answer to that question will ever keep it to themselves. I'll tell you that right now. It's the opposite, If you've been to a bad place and you got out, well, you can get other people out if they go to the same place. You can grab them right before they go in. You save them the heartache. And you don't do that because they deserve it or anything. You're just putting good in the world, that felt bad. And you know what you needed to learn. And if you learn it, you never have to feel bad, right? You can skip the class if you're willing to learn about it on purpose. So that's where the decision is made, right? You learn about it on purpose, or you don't worry about it. So when all the pieces come together, well, then you're going to see a lot more than it looked like, especially up close. Because up close, it doesn't look like anything. But when you zoom back and you see how all the little pieces are connected and how everything's involved, boy, it's a lot of work. A lot of time, a lot of talent, and a lot of patience. I think it takes all those things to understand what God is. So that's what I think God did when he made us. I think we're pieces of God, made in his image, with the desire to seek each other out. And it's our ultimate potential to figure out how to connect with enough people who are different than you are, to figure out the way to love everybody the way that we should. The kind of love that can separate a person who is acting in a way that can't be allowed, a violent way. You separate that behavior, and you separate it fairly, right? You don't separate it to discard the fair part of it. The action is separate, and the action has consequences, and those consequences are linked to that action, and that remains. But the elevation of that idea, thing that is added to that consequence, is the desire to learn deeply exactly how and why it went wrong, with the goal of preventing it from ever happening again. And ideally with the help of the person who just learned the worst lesson about it. That's the elevation of that idea. So the fairness remains, but the desire to do better is added. That's another part of what I think God is, and that's what he put us here for. And that's why no matter where you look, you're going to see that. You see it in artists who just want to make beautiful things. They want to share a part of creation they find joyful. They got part of it right. They see this little speck of it, and it's beautiful to them. And this is divine, and I have to spread that. And they do. And they do it for free. No, it's worse. They do it at expense to themselves. They'll lose, job opportunities, and they'll lose freedoms, and then stability, and maybe they don't make very much money because they're always buying art supplies, and they really don't get paid because what they're interested in isn't like that desirable, but they chase it, and they chase it because there's something there that they see that nobody else does. and they are able to magnify it and present it as a simple concept of a complicated truth. And even if we don't understand it the way the artist does, now we know it's there. He pointed to it. Hey, that area. And once you have that, then you can go do your own thing, right? You can go map that out. And I never thought about that before. I never thought about all the stuff those guys use. And there's a lot of tools, and there's a whole culture, and there's a history, and competitions, and all of these things. That's a whole part of the world that just opens up. And so when I say what God is, here's what I think God is. God is a being that created a perfect copy of himself and smashed it into 1,000 billion pieces. All of those pieces are the consciousness of God, every part of him. Spread out among people are magnifications of the smallest parts of God, unbalanced, unchecked, out there, waiting to be combined with all of the other unbalanced, unchecked, and uncontrolled pieces of God. They're the impulses, the causes without effects. They're the potentials. And so when those things interact, very specific things happen when very specific things interact. An infinitely number of specific things. And that is us. So we are the swarm of God that doesn't know that it's God, but together has everything it needs to be perfectly understanding of God, if somehow enough of them can figure out the ways that bring everyone together so that we start sharing this instead of competing and hiding and hurting. Like, that becomes the drive. That's how you know it's working. That's how you know it's right, is when people don't need to be forced to do the right thing. Everybody's on the same page. Everybody understands it the same way because they've talked about it with the goal of understanding it completely rather than just from their side, and balanced with the desire to do the most good for everybody. So no solutions that don't help everybody are even considered. That's not creative enough for people like that. And that is what I think God is. So that is the first balance of that, right? God is a thing that made a copy of himself, which we can measure. That's the other thing. We're the beginning measurement. All of us put together, all of the individual pieces of God put together, equals one God. Meaning, that's the whole picture. So now you see what God looks like. His full potential. And we are made in his image with the ability to choose and the desire to create, to understand better. Why would you break a thing into 1 billion pieces? You can already prove that you can make it. You did. You break it so that you can look at all the little pieces. So the reason that God made us, I not only dare say who God is, I dare say what God is up to. And God made us to create a thing that can elevate itself to his level, and to learn about himself in the process in a way that adds to everything he is currently, and lets him fill in pieces that he has not yet imagined, giving him the ability to improve upon himself. So God made us so that he could help us get the full benefits of what he has. And the reciprocity of that is we help teach him how to be a better God, because he has the desire to be a better God. That is his goal. It's a self-improvement that seeks to love and do the best thing for the most number of his people. There's a lot of stuff that happens to us that, if we really got our act together as a species, and I mean really, no more politics, no more religious wars, no more skin colors. Like, if we got everybody on the same page, even for 10 years, or 5. Earthquakes, hurricanes, cancer, with everybody working towards that goal, we could get rid of all of the suffering that happens from natural disasters and disease. Absolutely. And guess what? If we're able to do that with the natural disasters and the disease and all that stuff, because we spent so much time learning so much about it, because we cared so much about everybody who got hurt and we wanted to prevent those things from ever happening again, we literally created the thing we needed to make that possible. We imagined it into existence because it was that important. We overcame every problem that got in the way of figuring out what it takes to take the world and make it into a place that doesn't explode or blow over or flood. We did that. We got rid of the diseases that were being slow improved upon for who knows how many reasons. So now nobody gets cancer anymore, and nobody dies by accident, because that's what we focused on, all of us, every person. We were all so careful all the time because we cared. Well, if you've got that, to build that, you need to have the other part, which is the part that just cares about everybody so much that you don't have to worry about yourself. And the part that trusts the people enough to, be vulnerable to that. That's what it is. It's the vulnerability to be trusting, right? And when you make a decision to trust somebody, that really puts you on the spot, because nobody likes to feel like they didn't live up to a responsibility to themselves, or that maybe even they did everything right, but it didn't end well, but they feel like they did everything right, so it's okay. Well, you can't do that when you decide to trust somebody, right? Because that's your choice. You have to let down defenses. So that's a decision you make, and you're tied to that decision, in the most intimate way, because that's your strongest line of defense. You can't even rationalize it to yourself away. That's how deep the connection goes. Is no, I did that. And the reason that you have to say that is because you literally get the pop-up window. It's are you sure you want to not do this? And you have to say, yeah, okay. So you there's a record of it. A record you can't escape. And you trust the wrong thing. Well, then you can't get away from the fact that you made a decision and it was the wrong one and it went badly for you. You see exactly how it could have been a better decision and how you should have figured it out if you weren't being so, stubborn. For me, I just don't pay attention fast enough or long enough, I try, but I just get so interested in everything that it's hard to stay interested. You learn how to get really good at being interested in stuff, right? Because the faster you learn how to be interested in something, the more things you can go out and be interested in. So, wow, that's really interesting. Okay, that's everything I want to know about it. Wow, that was really cool. Oh, look over there, that thing's just as great. And then it's just boom, 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 because everything is so dang interesting. You have to choose, right? If you want to be interested in a lot of things, you can't be interested in anything for very long. And that's also a part of God. I think God is interested in everything. I think God cares about everything. And if you say God created everything, because you kind of have to if you're playing this game, you might not say that happened, but this game says that God created everything, and this situation says he did, so that's the rules we use in this one. Well, you really don't have any other choice but to decide that's how it is. It's all right there. So God made us to help us, because being like him is great. And the only way you get to be like him is if you learn how to decide to do it for yourself, then you make the right smart choices. And that those smart choices are cooperating with everybody to find better ways to help the most number of people and finding people you can trust to feel that way about you. And then because of that, God learns better ways and more creative ways to create better things and love things even more. So I'll close to counter, just not to counter, just to mention the fair argument that some people would make is if God can't change, he's unchanging because he's perfect. I have to, I thought of that, is what I would say. I said, what does it mean? Because I want to take it seriously, right? People say it, and a lot of people say it. So if they have taken it seriously enough that they're confident to tell me this, then I can't know how serious I need to take it until I understand it as good as they do. Or at least I tried to, right? And then they can help me, and they'll want to help me if I'm asking and I care to get the right answer, because I'm just trying to understand them better. So I think that learning how to understand ourselves better, and using that potential to help make other people better, is what it really means to be made in God's image. Because that's exactly what God is. And he's just been doing it for longer. He's been doing it for so long that he can give you the ability to try and follow him. If you listen to him, right? That's the key. He tells you what to do. It's in the Bible. And he tells you a lot of ways, but there's no excuse when you read the 2 sentences from Jesus where the guy says, hey, can you summarize the whole thing, what we're supposed to do? And Jesus says, here's the 2 things you need to know. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and all your strength and your mind. And we talked about what that means in the last episode. It just means you care about people because they're people, for the sake of nothing else. It's not something they earn or deserve. It just is a foregone conclusion. That's number 1, what it means to have no other gods. Because that's what God says is the way. And if you pick a different way, you might say God is in charge, but God knows that you don't find the way without learning from your own mistakes. And part of that is not knowing what all the mistakes are going to be, and those mistakes are going to be different for every person. And a mistake for one person is actually a strength for someone else. And it gets very confusing. That's the price, you know? That's the price of having no other gods. You care about everybody who's alive. That's what it means to have no other gods. And then he dumbs that one down. And he says, and to love your neighbor as yourself. So forget about the whole first thing I said. I think it makes a lot of beautiful sense to me. But it's not necessary to have my core argument be true when you get to love your neighbor as yourself. That one's so easy and so easily ignored. It turns to love your neighbor as yourself when he deserves it. Love your neighbor as yourself when he's not being a jerk. Love your neighbor as yourself when he's not a danger to himself or others. He doesn't say any of those things. So that's really the simplest one. But I think you can look at it at that second layer that I talked about, and I think it's true. It's what I think. I dare say who God is. I dare say that God, I dare say that he cares to be better. And if you ask me to compare a being that is unchanging in power, perfect, to a being that is able to improve on itself because it cares to, the second one would be the more perfect of the two. And so, with that, thank you all for watching this episode. And if I get struck by lightning or my roof caves in the next few minutes, well, still watch the video, because it's going to be up to you to figure out exactly where I went wrong. So, if nothing else, it could stop it from happening again. But I think I made some pretty safe bets. And I think one of those safe bets is that I'll be around tomorrow to try and make just a little bit more sense for, I don't know, a few more years until I've made enough sense, and then I gotta go. So, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.